What's been the biggest issue that you've been facing with your job search? Is it a lack of roles that you've come across, or is it just like
Yeah, there's
not
just
here, people?
not that many Android specific roles available. A lot of roles are asking for React Native
Okay.
rather
Yeah.
than Android.
Yeah. I don't know too much about your line of work. React, that would be more of a programming language for like web apps. Is that right? Or,
React is for web apps. React Native is for cross platform Android and iPhone apps and
okay.
JavaScript.
Okay. So it's more along the lines of they want to just code everything in the same language as opposed to doing something separately in Android and iOS.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But there's
So
definitely
what do you think?
disadvantages to that approach.
Yeah. What?
It's less efficient.
Okay. In what way, as far as like memory usage, speed?
Yeah, there's a certain overhead required.
Okay. Have you been looking at other cities or just in you're based in Melbourne, right?
Based in Melbourne, yeah, I've mainly been looking at roles that are Melbourne based, but I have looked for remote work that's based out of other cities.
Are there many job postings for remote work in your line of business?
Not really. These days, everything seems to be hybrid. So they're wanting someone who can come into the office a few days a week.
Yeah. Okay. So have you successfully at least gotten any interviews yet or
I've
just
had a
nothing?
few interviews, yes.
Yeah. And what was the issue with those? Was it that they wanted to use React and you just don't have experience in it or
No, those were for Android specific
Join?
roles. Most of them, I'm not sure why they turned me down, but the most recent one I had, they said that my answers lacked depth. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I guess in future I need to go into more depth with my answers.
Okay. And how long have you been working as an Android developer?
Since 2011, 14 years.
Oh, wow. Long time. Yes. So you
That's
obviously know
why
what you're
I'm
doing.
surprised it's taking me so long to get a new job.
I'm in the same scenario myself. I've been in tech for 13 years now. I've been unemployed for 6 months. I'm not sure how long you've been unemployed, but
Yeah, about
for
about
for
that.
me, about that, yeah. For me, it's been there's tons of jobs out there, but there's also tons of people applying for the jobs. So anything that's been on the market for longer than 3 days has 200 plus people that have applied for it. I guess me and you have separate difficulties in that regard. Why don't you just take me through your career to date so far?
Yeah, after university, I started at a company called Adapter, which is a consultancy. And I worked for another consultancy when I moved here to Melbourne, which lasted until during COVID, where I switched more working directly with companies. I've had quite a few contracts.
Okay. And
I
what? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
was going to say, most recently, I was working at a company called Doe for a few years, which is a fintech startup. And then I did a 6 month stint at the ABC.
Oh, okay. I actually had an interview with them a couple of years ago, if I remember correctly. What sort of projects have you worked on for those companies? Is it obviously you're an Android developer, so you're developing Android apps, but I'm assuming there's projects that are very different from each other, especially depending on, like you said, one was a finance company. I imagine their needs
Yeah.
are a lot different than the needs of say, Netflix.
Yeah. Well, it's not all that different. A lot of the differences are hidden away in the back end. So most Android apps are put together quite similarly and use REST APIs to communicate with the back end. It's all very similar. I have done a few projects that are a bit out of left field though. Like I did one project that was for helping detect when horses are giving birth. I
Oh,
did
good.
another one that was like an interface for a self-driving car.
Oh, cool. Have you focused on anything involving? I don't know. Is there any AI stuff in the Android space at the moment?
There's a bit. What actually the company I interviewed with the other week was doing some stuff with AI on Android, that analyzing meat like evaluating the price, like the value of a piece of beef.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you were talking about like quality based off of a picture or something like
Yeah.
that.
Um, but I haven't done a lot of work with AI myself professionally, but I've done a bit of stuff in my spare time because it's interesting.
You said you've been doing this since 2011. Have you been an Android developer the entire time, or did you transition from something else?
Android's been my focus for most of that time, but I've done other stuff as well. Like I've done iPhone stuff. I also, for the earlier part of my career, I spent a lot of time working with the Microsoft Kinect. And I've done stuff with augmented reality before, like the HoloLens. So I'm across how to use Unity for game development stuff as well.
Yeah. As far as your next role goes, is there anything that you think a future employer should know about like the projects that you've worked on and the kind of work that you've done?
I guess it's the fact that I'm quite adaptable. I've worked with a lot of new technologies, stuff that's quite unexplored. Like I was working with the HoloLens when it first came out, and there wasn't a lot of documentation, not a lot of Stack Overflow answers or anything like that. So a lot of discovering things for myself. And I'm almost entirely self taught with Android as well. I didn't study computer science at uni, I studied astrophysics. But in my spare time, I taught myself how to make apps.
Cool. I actually have a physics background myself. My bachelor's degree is just a general physics degree.
Cool.
That's interesting. Did you do much coding in college for your physics degree? Because I know that it was a requirement for us to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I did. I actually even taught some computer science units.
The thing I ever did was TA for some of my physics professors. But I did have one project. I actually worked abroad in Sweden for a summer working on an experiment with one of my professors. And we had to write a data analysis program, C++, but that was ages ago. So is Android the thing that you most definitely want to continue with, or are you considering any other sort of lateral move to something else at
Uh,
this point?
I'd be open to other roles, but I think people hiring for those other roles want people with more experience. Android's the only thing that I have years and years of experience in and know like the back of my hand,
Mhm.
but I've dabbled in other stuff like Unity, I mentioned. I've also,
Mhm.
I know Python, and I haven't worked professionally in back end, but I've done personal projects where I've had to do the full stack. Yeah. Like I
Yeah.
made a trivia game on as browser based using Flutter, and that used Firebase as the backend, and that was quite a lot of fun. Used an open source repository of trivia questions and would present it to you in a way similar to Jackbox games, where like the
Oh, okay.
players connect using their phones.
I played that one before. What's it called? The one basically where it's like Cards Against Humanity, only you can answer whatever you want when the
Quip,
question is from. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
So
Similar
I
to
made
that.
a similar sort of system to that where you connect using your phone and you put in a code for the room ID, and then you can have multiple people playing at one off
And
one mate.
do you think you've had issues showcasing your skills at all? Obviously, you have a resume when you apply to jobs, but I'm assuming as someone who's a developer, you have a like a GitHub repository of some of the stuff that you work.
I've got some stuff in GitHub. Most of my work has been closed source, working for companies. It's a bit hard to
Right.
show
I
that
guess that
off.
makes sense. Yeah.
So I have to try and demonstrate my skills in technical interviews, and sometimes there's like a technical challenge where they get you to write a bit of code and modify a template project to do certain objectives. And yeah, it's really hard to demonstrate just the breadth of my knowledge.
Yeah, especially if a technical assessment, obviously, like it's going to be focusing on like one thing probably. And if that one thing is something that you don't have much experience with, it's going to make it look as though you don't know what you're talking about. I could be completely off base with that, but that would be akin to asking me about an AWS service in a technical interview that I've never used before. And just because I don't know that one service doesn't mean that I don't know anything else about. Uh, so, what's the feeling you have as far as to why there just aren't um, very many Android jobs? Is it that the companies that used to employ those people are now switching to that other model that you said, or is there's
I
not
think that's
enough companies?
yeah, I think that's part of the problem is that a lot of companies are switching to hybrid, switching to a cross-platform uh, framework, which I'm not a huge fan of. I have experimented with them in the past, but I definitely prefer to work with native code.
Right. Yeah, I would. I wish I knew more about development and coding in general for me to be able to ask you some relevant questions about it. But yeah, aside from the fact that you've worked as a developer now for since 2011, is there like one project that you're most proud of that you've worked on?
One that I quite often use as an example is the self-driving car interface. There was a lot
Yeah.
of technical challenges to that because it had to run on specific hardware that was quite underpowered. And yet there were some quite lavish design requirements, especially around animation. And I was able to get it working in a performant manner, which I'm quite proud
Mhm. You
of.
said in the past you've worked contract gigs. Have you considered trying to start your own thing again or going back to contracting?
I'm applied for all sorts of roles that I've found online. Some of them are contract roles, some of them are permanent. I don't think I'd like to run my own business. I'd rather stick to the coding side of things.
Yeah, I have a friend back in the US who started his own web development business. He's been doing it now for probably 8 or 9 years, and his least favorite part is the business aspect of it, as opposed to actually doing the web development. So I know what you mean there. You've been looking for 6 months, and you say there aren't very many jobs out there. How many jobs would you say you come across in a week or a month that you think that you can actually apply for based off of what your past experience is?
Yeah, probably about half a dozen or so that are fully relevant per month.
Oh, wow, it's that dry out there?
Yeah, but I have been branching out into other related job openings like iOS gigs or stuff that uses Xamarin, which is one of those cross-platform frameworks. It's based on .NET, which I've got some experience in from my work with
Mhm.
Unity. I think I'd be capable of one of those roles, but no, I know when I apply that it's unlikely to get anything come back because it's just not what I have experience in, and they're looking for people who have experience with those specific frameworks.
Yeah, and I feel like right now, at least again, this is my experience, but there aren't very many roles out there willing to let you learn on the job for the most part, even if you'd be capable of learning while you're on the job. I know
Yeah.
every job that I've applied for, even if it says entry level, it's like they want 3 years experience in cloud. So I imagine it's a similar story for Android and also for another role that you would want to move into.
Yeah, and one thing that I've had found particularly challenging with that is that there's been quite a move to something called Jetpack Compose, which is a whole new way of doing UI. And because the role I was in previously doesn't use it, I just don't have experience with it. Luckily, I was able to get that job at ABC, which did use Jetpack Compose. So I now have 6 months under my belt of using it, but it can turn people off if you don't have experience with the latest frameworks. I had a
Mhm.
mobile developer role the other day turned me down because I didn't have experience with Swift UI, which is a more modern way of doing iOS layouts. And I just haven't had an opportunity to work with it in a professional sense because Like, even though I've worked with iPhone, I've been working with the old system UI kit rather than
Mhm.
Swift. And it's a bit of a chicken and an
Yeah.
egg problem because you can't get experience in it unless you're in a job that uses it. And you can't get a job that uses it without experience. I have done some in my spare time, but it's just a big difference between a small personal project and an actual professional project.
Are you open to relocation at all? Because I know some of the people that I've talked to so far, they've said that that's something that they're considering. I know Australia is a little bit harder to relocate than say like the US because there's so many more cities over there. But I just thought I'd ask.
I'd consider relocation as long as it was provided by the employer. I don't have any
Well,
funds available to relocate myself. I'm living paycheck to paycheck off Centrelink at the moment.
mm,
I've got no savings left. I couldn't afford to move. Uh,
yeah, I've been unemployed for as long as you, so I know how that goes. It's a real unfortunate state of affairs right now. It seems across the board in all areas of tech right now. It's really hard to get roles. Have you had any issues with going for roles and then being canceled or just getting ghosted after you've done the interview?
I have I interviewed at Coles a few weeks ago, and they never got back to me after the interview. I thought it went well, but apparently not.
Yeah, over the last 4 weeks, I've had 3 recruiters reach out to me for roles and then they just never hear back from the client. And then also there was one role that I interviewed for. It was 2 interviews and a take home tech assessment. And then they ended up not hiring anybody from the interview process. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
been mine last month or so.
I had an interview that I had late last year, and because it was getting towards Christmas time, it was working for an agency, and they needed me to interview with the. I passed the interview with them, but I needed to also interview with the client, and the client being a bank and it being Christmas time was just completely unresponsive, and they never ended up getting back to me in the new, even though I followed up
Yeah,
with.
that's one of the really negative things that I've noticed about living in Australia versus living in the US. You basically can't get a new role by from like the end of November until like maybe the beginning or middle of February because everyone's away for break. And then because your financial year ends, what is it, July? It's like nobody wants to hire in June or leading up to June either. So you've got like significant less time over here, it feels, to be able to actually secure a role throughout the year. Are there any skills that you, I shouldn't say that you want me to know about, but are there any skills that you would want to make clear that you have that a prospective employer uh, might want to know about?
I guess a lot of the stuff is is fairly standard in my
Okay.
industry, but I think one thing that sets me apart is that I've got quite good communication skills. I've even done a course in stand-up comedy, which I did to help me with my public speaking.
Yeah, I noticed that you had that advertised on your LinkedIn. I thought that was cool. I'm a really big stand-up fan. So it's always been something like I've tried to fantasize about doing stand-up comedy, but yeah, I've never really gotten there. Have you done it recently?
Not recently. It was mostly during COVID was doing it.
Oh, okay. I'm
It
surprised the
was quite
places were open.
frustrating actually. A lot of gigs kept getting cancelled because we kept going into
Yeah,
lockdown.
yeah, I can imagine. Do you see yourself going back to that?
Maybe.
I feel communication is certainly a big part of tech that not necessarily people think about all the time, but I certainly view it as a big skill in my skill set. It's never a bad thing to have. Yeah, I guess that's really all the questions I have. Is there anything else that you want to say or you wanted to ask?
No.
No? Okay. I guess we can wrap up here then, unless you want to go like off recording and if there's anything you wanted to talk about.
No, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Thanks for talking to me today. And I wish you the best of luck. Hopefully you find something soon.